And I would like to welcome you all here this afternoon. I would like to first acknowledge and thank our council member Darius Brown, who is here from Wilmington City Council. Thank you, Darius. We have this beautiful, beautiful tall ship. We have this fantastic new building where we create and teach hands-on experiential education programs focused on Delaware's colonial and maritime history. And now through this tremendous partnership with DNREC, we are thrilled to enhance our offerings with this sustainable landscape that has risen out of a brownfield to share with students and visitors alike. There are a lot of people who have worked on this team, and we are very thankful to all of them. I'd like to thank Greg Dukowski, Kate Durant, Carissa Hendershot, Christina Wirtz, and Lindsay Hall from DNREC. I'd like to thank our landscaping committee led by volunteer Kathy Shearer. Kathy, wave with the scissors. Martha Stevens from the Delaware Center for Horticulture, and our partners at Brightfields and EA Engineering, Science and Technology. We also appreciate the support of Eileen Hazard and the Mount Cuba Center. I would also like to thank two of our speakers today who have been very involved in all of the work and the site development. UD Professor Sue Barton and ecologist Matt Sarver. Yay. But first I would like to introduce Marjorie Crofts, DNREC Director for the Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances. Marjorie. You have to hold the microphone, sorry.
I got it. Thank you.
Sure.
It is so great to be here today, and I'm here on behalf of our Cabinet Secretary, David Small, who really wanted to be here with us all today. It's a special pleasure for me because I actually have ancestors that date back to the Kalmar Nyckel, so it's great to see all this here. And I really can't take any credit for any of this other than signing the bills to say it's okay to spend the money.
Thank you.
That really goes to Tim Ratsup, the director of our site investigation and restoration section, and all his wonderful staff. This is our first brownfields where we have done sustainable landscaping, so it's a great pleasure for us to have this be our demonstration project. It's really hard to believe that just over 65 years ago this whole area was the Jackson and Sharp American Car Foundry, and that was that way for over 90 years. And at their peak, they produced over 400 rail cars a year. So you think of this as being just a huge industrial area. Thank you. And took the entire 7th Street Peninsula. And that's basically the reason the Brownfields program was adopted, was to take these old sites that are contaminated, that didn't look very nice, and have somebody do something with them. And so we started with that. And Lindsay Hall's here. Lindsay, where are you? Oh, way over there. Lindsay was a project officer for this as a brownfield site, and that was with a $1 million grant from our agency, and had to remove some really heavily lead contaminated soil, put up a cap on the property to make sure that nobody came in contact with it and really didn't affect either public health, the people that were working and volunteering here, and also to prevent ecological impacts. And that's the main goal of the Brownfields program. But it was really Greg Dukowski. Greg is a retired scientist. He just left. He's over there. Really started pushing us to say we need to get back to natural habitat, especially in these urban areas where there isn't a lot of habitat. Everybody does landscaping when they do projects, so let's get that landscaping to be something that's worthwhile. And so it was really Greg who went and said, talk to the Kalmar Nyckel, who was already on board with this type of thing. Talked to Sue Barton, because he was always working with her on something else. Kalmar Nyckel brought in Matt Sarver, and we brought in EA Engineering to give us a hand, and they all worked very well together with a bunch of other volunteers to pick the plants and to get this thing done. So I really have to thank all of them for their hard work, and you'll be hearing from them. This really was done to demonstrate the economic value and aesthetic value of native plants on brownfields. Lindsay, of course, kept in her working with this to make sure that the cap wasn't disturbed and the remedy was still in place. And it really shows how the Brownfields program can go on beyond remediation and really improve habitat in the area. And we also appreciate our strong partnership with the Kalmar Nyckel Foundation and their commitment to conservation and stewardship, along with the historic and cultural aspects of their association. So that's it for me. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Sue Barton, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist with the University of Delaware, and one of our key partners in this project.
Thank you. So it's really opportune that I'm here today. I just, in my Plants and Human Culture class at the University of Delaware this morning, gave a lecture on sustainable landscaping. So everything's right top of mind. And in fact, I even received a few emails from my undergraduate students later after class saying how much they really enjoyed those concepts of sustainable landscaping. One person asked me for some images from my PowerPoint that she wanted to show her mother to convince her to have a more sustainable landscape at home. So it really warmed my heart that I was making an impression on 55 undergraduate students. And it's really important because what I teach is that sustainable landscaping is important in order to provide the ecosystem services that we all need to survive. Those natural lands that we used to have so much of just aren't there anymore in the quantity that we need them to provide the ecosystem services. So we're not going to move development back. We're not going to, take a developed area and move it back to a natural system. But what we can do is manage the land that we have available to us sustainably. And the main land that we have available to us is each of our own suburban landscapes. But we're talking about a pretty big paradigm switch for what people should expect to see in their suburban landscapes. What they see now is a mowed lawn and a little bit of plant decoration around the base of the house. That's the norm. That's what everyone does. It's what's expected. So if we want to see that changed by incorporating lots of native plants, meadows, forests, a looser looking landscape, a lot more diversity and a lot less lawn, we're going to have to get people comfortable with that sort of landscape. The best way to get people comfortable with that kind of a landscape is for them to see it all around them, for them to see it in public places, for them to see it where they go. So when they volunteer their time at Kalmar Nyckel, or when they bring their kids to have a tour of this wonderful tall ship, they will see this sustainable landscape, this meadow, these native plants, and they'll start to appreciate that aesthetic. So putting these systems out into the landscape in a place like Kalmar Nyckel is such an important step to getting people prepared and ready for that new kind of landscaping. So with that, I think Matt's going to talk specifically about the native plants and the native plants that were selected here for this landscape. So I'm scanning.
He's right there.
Oh, okay. It's like, where did Matt go? So I'm going to turn it over to Matt Sarver and let him tell you a little bit of the story of this particular landscape.
Thank you, Sue. As Kathy mentioned earlier, I'm Matt Sarver. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an ecologist with Sarver Ecological here in Delaware. I also happen to be a volunteer sailing crew member on Kalmar Nyckel for about a decade now. So this was a very natural project for me to get involved with from an ecological side. And the site is very close to my heart, and I think it has a lot of potential for the kind of things that we're talking about today. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how this project came about and sort of where we see it going in the future. It was really a project of opportunity as this beautiful and long-awaited new building and dock were being built by Kalmar Nyckel Foundation. Understandably, the final appearance of the landscape was not at the top of everyone's minds. We really needed this new facility, this wonderful education facility and museum. And a group of us got together as the project was nearing completion to discuss how we could inject some ecology and some native plants and so forth into the finished landscape. So we started by modifying some plant lists and planting plans that were originally created for the formal areas that you saw probably in the front over here by the front door and just behind us, to add some species diversity and add some resources for pollinators and so forth. And then we were fortunate that DNREC had some funding available to help us do a lot more than that. And I want to acknowledge and thank Kathy Shearer, who's the chair of what became known as the Kalmar Nyckel Landscape Committee. She's here in the front row, as well as all the committee members. I think there's several of you probably here today. I know I saw June Robbins somewhere. We had a great landscape committee with Kalmar Nyckel Foundation, and also Kathy Parcells for all of her strong support of that effort on the Kalmar Nyckel side. And I also want to thank EA. Kristen Rigney is here someplace, and some other folks from EA, I believe, back there, for their work on the project as the consultant for DNREC. And as well, a number of Kalmar Nyckel volunteers who help both with the planting and the follow-up maintenance that's ongoing on the site. So thank you all. As you can imagine, there were a number of challenges with a site like this. Very, post-industrial site that's already sort of under construction. We had some compacted soils. We had some erosion control materials that were here from the construction. And as a colleague of mine likes to say, the soil is really the cake and the plants are just the icing. So coming in and putting the proverbial icing on the cake is never quite as easy as it looks or as you think it should be. Well, we've come a long way. And what we did is we specified plant material that was very diverse to start with, in part because we had sort of an artificial site or a cap over the brownfield here. We didn't really know exactly what the soil specifications were going to be or exactly what the hydrology was going to be. So we included over 60 species of locally appropriate herbaceous plants and about 19 species of shrubs and trees. And these are species that were native both to primarily to the Piedmont here in Delaware, but also some from the adjacent coastal plain, because where we sit here is essentially on the fall line between Piedmont and coastal plain. As we expected, some of these species have done very well. Others have not done quite as well. Thank you. And we can use this information going forward in future adaptive management of the site. So we chose a wide range of species to provide resources primarily for invertebrates, for insects and pollinators, to provide nectar, pollen, caterpillar host plants, and cover for a wide variety of those species throughout the year. Greg Dukowski, who was this sort of a brainchild of his, and he wanted me to thank also Doug Tallamy at University of Delaware, whose amazing book, Bringing Nature Home, has been an inspiration for all of us in terms of understanding exactly how deeply the connections between biodiversity and native plants run, and how those species can be used to support a wide variety of insects. And we know that this approach can work even in small remnant patches within a very urban landscape like Wilmington. Insects exist not in large contiguous populations typically, but in small patchy populations. And so if you put enough of those patches of habitat together, you can have a meaningful species scale impact for conservation of pollinators and other insects. And already we're seeing dramatic results. Just in this small area, we've seen large numbers of butterflies, moths, bees, dragonflies, and other insects using the site. Monarchs, skippers, dusky wings, azures, blues, pearl crescents, sulfurs, whites. The names alone are evocative. And in his remarks at the launch of America's Great Outdoors Initiative a few years ago, President Obama noted that for many Americans, we can go days without stepping on a single blade of grass. That's typically true in urban areas. And this is the challenge that we're trying to address with this project. We're starting to have a landscape here in which the 5,000 students who visit here every year can have their first experience with a monarch butterfly or understand that bumblebees are important pollinators for the foods that we eat. We are laying a foundation for the kinds of interactions that are so desperately needed, as Sue mentioned, in our public spaces. So I just want to thank you all for your support of this effort, and I look forward to seeing more projects like this in Wilmington so that we can begin to scale up the ecological benefits throughout the urban environment. Thanks.
All right, ready? 5, 4, 3, 2,